Hello everyone and welcome to part 2 of our massive deep dive into the Arrancar arc, where we attempt to rank some of the best fights from Bleach's longest storyline. We're splitting the arc up into 3 sub-arcs to try and do it justice: the Arrancar invasion, the Hueco Mundo invasion, and then the fake Karakura town battle. We've already done part 1, which is the Arrancar invasion, where we looked at volumes 21 through to 27 and tried to rank what I felt to be the 10 best fights from that part of the story. So if you haven't seen it yet, make sure to go and check that video out now. Let me know what you think. But in this video, we're going to be taking a look at volumes 28 through to 35, and things are really starting to ramp up now as we enter the Hueco Mundo invasion sub-arc. And in many ways, in my opinion, this is probably where this arc becomes most iconic. I mean, after all, the setting is quite literally the arc's namesake, and it's where the Espada fights really start coming into their own, and we see a real variety of characters and abilities on display. So whereas that first video was full of mostly small skirmishes towards the beginning of this arc, in this one we're really tackling some of the big, most famous fights in the series. Before we begin, if you haven't subscribed yet, guys, make sure to hit that button now. If you love Bleach, you're in the perfect place for content like this every single week. We are still pushing towards 60,000 subs. Thank you all so much for your support. If we could get there, that would be absolutely incredible. Don't forget to give the video a like as well if you enjoyed it, because it does help with exposure over on YouTube. And if you want to support the channel out that little bit more, if you like my content and enjoy what I do here, we do now have a Patreon for the channel as well. You can find the link in the description below, where you can support me for as little as £1 a month. But either way, I really appreciate your support. So then, let's dive into our list of the top 10 best fights from the Hueco Mundo sub-arc. As always, let me know in the comments below how you feel about my list, and I'd love to read yours as well. So coming in at number 10, we have Ichigo and Nell versus Dordoni Alessandro del Secaccio. I mean, that's a brilliant name if I've ever heard one. And this is the first major battle against one of the Privarone Espada, essentially demoted Espada, who are no longer seen as necessary when compared to Aizen's new, all-powerful Espada created artificially, essentially, by the Hogyoku. For the most part, in my eyes, the Privarone Espada fights are kinda duds. I'm not gonna lie, this one is really on here because I needed a 10th place spot, and it doesn't do a whole lot to blow me away. That being said, I do like Dordoni's design, even though I'm not crazy about Giralda, his release form. His actual design, pulling on sort of Diablo elements, is actually really cool. The best thing about this fight, in my opinion, however, is that Kubo uses it to almost lull Ichigo into a false sense of security. Dordoni is not like most other Arrancar. He has a sense of honor about him, and I really like that. Ichigo is understandably pretty stubborn in this fight. This is the first major opponent he's actually come up against, really, after entering Hueco Mundo enemy territory, and he doesn't want to give the game away as to what he can actually do, but he's forced to after Dordoni starts targeting Nell. And I really like that. It kind of shows Dordoni's slightly more devilish side, the underhandedness of the Arrancar coming out, even though he attempts to justify it himself. And you do get this sense of begrudging respect between the combatants here, which I do really enjoy. Also, speaking of Nell, we get a small hint as to some of the full extent of her powers when she essentially uses Cerro Doble on Dordoni, when she swallows up his Cerro and then fires it back at him, which is quite a nice little bit of foreshadowing there. But what I do really like about it is how when Ichigo decides to use essentially the full extent of his power, he defeats Dordoni incredibly quickly, and I do really like that. And I think Dordoni does himself a lot of favours at the end of this fight as well, when he holds off the Exequias just long enough for Ichigo to get away, although of course the Exequias turn out to actually be there for Dordoni, which is a nice little twist as well. So yeah, this fight comes in at 10th. It doesn't do a huge amount to blow me away, but I still like it nonetheless. And speaking of fights against the Privarone Espada, coming in at number 9, we have Chad versus Gantenbane Mosqueda. And I'm kind of surprised to see a Chad fight on here, but I actually do like this one. It's one of Chad's very rare moments to shine. Depressingly, I'm pretty sure, unless I'm mistaken, this is the last opponent Chad actually defeats in the manga, which is kind of ridiculous. But yeah, it's a decent fight again, showing a mutual respect between the two combatants. Once again, Gantenbane is an Arrancar with some kind of honor code, it seems. It's interesting that the Privarone are a bit like this. Soruchi is a little bit more wacky and a little bit more crazy, but certainly Dordoni and Gantenbane seem a little bit more level-headed headed than a lot of the Arrancar do. Gantenbane himself, he's okay, he's not got the craziest design. His release formula was called Dragra, and we never actually hear its release command, which is interesting as well. It's one of the only Arrancar Zanpakuto we'd never hear the command for. But it does look pretty cool. I love his little sunglasses that he has when he fires up his massive attacks. But obviously the real winner of this fight is Chad himself, who undergoes not just one, but 2 transformations in one fight, getting both of his arms almost like to full power. And this really is the final power-up we get to see for Chad as well, but it's lovely giving him this spotlight. And La Muerte is actually a really awesome move. I love the imagery on show when he punches Gantenbane with it and it creates the explosion behind him that looks like a skull. That's wonderful. It's just a shame that Kubo then reverts very quickly back to old habits and has Chad instantly one-shot by Neutra, but what can you do? He's only allowed the spotlight for a certain amount of time. Like I said, though, I do like this fight. Gantenbane's a cool enemy who actually survives and then he's never seen again, which is kind of rare. But yeah, for the most part, I love this fight for Chad's development. It's well deserved. The number 8 spot on the list goes to Nell versus Neutra. And this is a nice fight, mostly for the emotion involved. These two have a real history together. Neutra has kind of persecuted her for the entire time they actually spent in Hueco Mundo together, constantly annoyed that he feels she's looking down on him. You know, we've gone through this in Nell's character analysis. But actually, they have a really interesting dynamic, I think, where it kind of feels like Nell is provoking him a little bit sometimes. She knows what his personality is like, and yet she does feel like she eggs him on a little bit. But of course, Neutra himself is also very out of line. He is quite sexist. He does kind of definitely feels like he should be better than her, even though he's not, and it's a real point of contention for him. So it's nice to see them meet again in the present day. This obviously has the amazing twist that Nell, who we thought was just a weird little baby all this time, actually is a fully grown woman. She transforms, returns to her normal form to defend Ichigo after he is getting really badly beaten up by Neutra. And it's cool because Nell is like the virtuous, she's honourable. Neutra represents the underhandedness, the slime of the Arrancar. Like Neutra really is, when you think of an Arrancar's personality, at least I do, Neutra really comes to mind. He's devious, he's underhanded, he'll beat someone when they're down, he doesn't care if the fight is fair or not. He is, in the best case of a word, a monster. And this fight's nice. It's not particularly flashy because Neutra doesn't go into his resurrection or anything like that, but Nell does. We get to see Gamuza, which is really cool. Lanzador Verde is nice. There's a cool moment when it kind of shatters his sword a little bit, but then it hits his chest, and you see his Hierro actually means that he doesn't really even get wounded by it. So where that fight would have gone, I think, is interesting as well, but then, we see Neutra's Cero, Nell catches it, fires it back. It's a nice little fight. I think mostly it gets to 8th because of the emotion involved between these two characters, but yeah, it's really cool to see Nell fighting at full strength nonetheless. At 7th place on the list, we have Renji and Uryu versus the 8th Espada Xyloporo Grands. Now, I'll level with you. Xyloporo's never been my favourite Espada, and as far as I'm concerned, every fight scene he has is way too dragged out. It lasts for so long. But that doesn't mean it's not entertaining, and actually I do quite like this fight. It's really nice seeing Renji and Uryu coming together. It's kind of like the odd couple pairing, but they've never really interacted too much before, apart from when Renji nearly kills him at the very start of the series. So it's nice to see them fighting back to back and doing some cool stuff here. I will say that one of my favourite ever combos is in this fight when Renji uses his Zanpakuto to wrap up Xyl, blasts him in the face with a Shakuho. Xyl staggers out like, how dare you do this to me, and steps right into Uryu's Sprenger. Really, really cool. There's a lot of instances in the Arrancar arc, particularly in the Hueco Mundo arc in my opinion, where Kubo felt like he was afraid to give Ichigo's Nakama a real win, and I think that Uryu and Renji could have done more damage to Xyl here than they are allowed to do, essentially, if that makes sense. It felt like Kubo very much was saving a lot of the Espada for when the captains arrived, and so Ichigo and his friends can only do so much, and I think that's a shame because I love this creative combination. I think it works really well and makes for a really interesting fight. Xyl then uses his Resurrection against them for Nicholas, or La Lujuriosa if you're reading the censored version. But basically, yeah, and this is when the fight gets really wacky. You get some cool stuff, a bunch of clones appear. Later on, Xyl does the thing where he has Uryu's little voodoo doll, which then affects Uryu's organs. really cool stuff. And as much as I said that Xyle is not my favourite Espada, he does have really creative abilities. And it is just a really nice fight altogether. There are some cool moments. Uryu shooting Xyle through the neck with an arrow is really nice as well. Xyle freaking out over finding a Quincy, which is cool. And actually, I like that. In my opinion, that moment with Xyle freaking out about a Quincy is supposed to be foreshadowing that he's not quite the scientist Mayuri is. Because obviously Mayuri's been there, done that as far as the Quincy are concerned, and Xyle's like freaking out, like, oh, I'm so lucky I found a Quincy, you know. So yeah, that's really nice. I think again, like I said, it's a decent fight. There are moments where, again, I've mentioned this already, but I feel like either the Espada feel overpowered or Ichigo's friends feel underpowered. You know, at the start of this fight, Renji, admittedly in Shikai, but still, this is Renji, is attempting to attack Xyle, and Xyle's just like batting it away like it's nothing. Feels a little bit like, I don't know, a bit unrealistic. I guess the Espada are really, really powerful, but like Renji's no pushover, but he's jobbing hard in the Arrancar Arc, so. But yeah, I do enjoy this fight for the variety on show. There's a ton of characters involved. Pesce and Donda Chaka shot for a little bit. They have a nice moment as well, the Zero Syncretico. But predominantly, I love Uryu and Renji working together and pulling off some nice combo moves against Xyle. And coming in at number 6, we have the other fight with Xyle Aporo Grands, which is Mayuri Kurotsuchi versus Xyle. And again, yeah, I have much the same criticisms for this fight as I did for the last one. It feels like it gets dragged out unnecessarily long, but perhaps more so than anything in this fight, Xyle's threat level is just immediately diminished. And that's what's so weird about it. It feels like there's so much whiplash. We go from a character who can bat away Renji Zanpakuto in his base form with practically no problem, to a character who genuinely cannot do anything to Mayuri. This is the fight that exemplifies the worst of Mayuri's fights, in my opinion, where he just comes in with an unbelievable level of preparation. Xyle attempts to crush his organs, and Mayuri's just absolutely fine because apparently he saw the fight through the bugs that were in Uryu, I think it is, or Renji, I can't remember one of them. He has like surveillance in them, and he can see the fight, so he just replaced all of his organs because why not? And it is the fight that exemplifies the issues people had with Mayuri's ultra preparation more than anything. Like, at least later on with the fight against, like, Pernida, for instance, Mayuri is on the ropes, and you do get some good preparation moments with him there as well, but I do feel like it's way more interesting seeing Mayuri fighting by the skin of his teeth than just laughing and trolling his way through a battle. Don't get me wrong, there are great Mayuri moments in this, such as when Nemu flat out dies, and he turns around with the biggest grin on his face. Like, I absolutely love that. That is a classic Mayuri moment. But yeah, like I said, as far as I'm concerned, it teeters a little bit too far into the suspension of disbelief. Just that Mayuri is so capable of shutting down everything Xyle has, makes the fight just not that interesting, in my opinion, in comparison to the rest, but it's still not bad. Mayuri is always a great laugh, I think, and Xyle's death is kind of haunting. Like, it's pretty harrowing what actually happens. Mayuri stabbing him through the heart, but making it so that that singular moment will feel like a century. It's crazy. But yeah, Mayuri just getting the better of Xyle at every turn does kind of get a little bit old. Entering the top 5 on our list now, and we have Byakuya Kuchiki versus the 7th Espada, Zomari LaRue. Now, I actually really like this fight, and I don't know if that's going to be a popular opinion or not, but like I said before in previous videos, one thing I've always enjoyed about Byakuya is that he gets paired up with the kind of weird and wonderful enemies that end up creating some kind of like real sinister vibes. You get that with Zamari, you get that with Tsukushima, you get that with Asnot. Byakuya has a lot of these kind of fights where he goes up against the kind of mind-warping enemies. Now, Zamari's not really a mind-warping enemy, but that same sinister, eerie feel is there with this fight, and I love that, particularly at the start of the battle. I think it's really good. Byakuya obviously there to save Rukia. Zamari's about to finish her off. And it's a really interesting fight because it's quite a slow fight, it's quite steady, it almost feels a bit turn-based, but I kind of like that. Each character is feeling the other one out, you know, they're both extremely arrogant, which is a nice little personality clash as well. Zamari is cool in his base form. It's a shame that his resurrection is so utterly ridiculous because it does look really dumb. But that being said, I do think the Amor ability is quite terrifying. And bear in mind that in Bleach, this was very unique when it first came out. We didn't have the plethora of mind control abilities that we ended up with in the 1,000 Year Blood War arc. This was kind of scary. Zamari just looks at Byakuya, and his hand is now under Zamari's control. His foot is under his control. Zamari takes control of Ruka's entire body. But then Byakuya turns the tables, and what I like about this fight is that he just overpowers him. That's all it is. He just completely overwhelms him with Senbon Zakura Kageyoshi, and I think that's great. He uses Gokei just to detonate on Zamari, and then you get, in my opinion, one of the best finishes to a Bleach fight maybe ever, especially in the anime with the OST Nightmare playing, which, as you'll remember, I've said before, major spoilers for the 1,000 Year Blood War coming up, by the way. If you haven't read it yet, just skip ahead about a minute. But I want OST Nightmare to play when Rukia activates Bankai, and I've said that before against Asno. I think it'd be absolutely perfect. But Byakuya finishes off Zamari because he pointed his blade at Byakuya's pride, and I think it's fantastic. It's a great way to end the fight. Sure, Zamari is seen as a bit of a joke. I admit that. He is a bit of a joke as far as the Espada go, but I love the whole feel of the fight. I think it's really good. And also, just randomly, this one panel of Byakuya sort of half in the sunlight looks absolutely beautiful. I don't really know why, I just love that panel. But yeah, it's a really cool fight. Coming in at number 4, I don't know if this is going to be controversial or not, but this is the right placement for me. Kenpachi Zaraki versus the 5th Espada, Neutra Jiruga. And this is a slugfest, you know, this is the absolute definition of a slugfest, a bloodbath between two ravenous demons. They don't really have much in the way of special abilities, they are just hacking away at each other. And I like it for a time. And then it goes on, and Kenpachi just survives everything that is thrown at him. And, you know, so does Neutra, to be fair. They both just continually survive until Kenpachi kind of has to tell the reader that he's about to die, because otherwise we just wouldn't believe it. You know, and yeah, I don't mind it. It's fun. It's kind of dumb fun, this fight. Like, Neutra stabbing Kenpachi through the chest with, like, 2 hands is kind of ridiculous. But I like I said, I enjoy it all the same. Kenpachi does get some really cool moments. It's nice seeing someone who can kind of put the fear of God into Neutra a bit when, like, Kenpachi just starts laughing and grinning about taking all this damage. Neutra's like, what the hell's going on? The start of the fight's cool as well when Kenpachi just one-shots Tesla. I like that moment too. There's no real major development for Kenpachi in this fight, and actually that may be kind of, thinking about it now, kind of bugs me about the Captain fights in Hueco Mundo altogether, is that they are just reiterating on the characters we know from the Soul Society arc. There really is no development here. And actually, I just want to say again, and I always gush about the final arc, but that's one thing I think it does really well, is that Kubo seemingly went really out of his way to give the fighters involved some development. When it's the major characters, you know, Mayuri, Byakuya, Kenpachi, Shunsui, they all kind of go through fights coming out the other side kind of feeling like different people. It doesn't always work out perfectly, but like this Kenpachi versus Neutra fight is a perfect example, of my opinion, of the status quo. Like, Kenpachi is just doing what the fans love, just hacking and slashing and laughing and loving battle, and Neutra eventually just gets carved up by a 2-handed kendo slash, which to this day I do still kind of think is ridiculous. Kenpachi just grabs his blade with both hands, and that's pretty much it. That doesn't really constitute development, in my opinion. It felt to me like Kubo was like, this fight's been going on for absolutely ages now. How do I realistically just bring it to an end? But that being said, it's 4th on the list for a reason, and that's because I do like it. I like the imagery on display. I like the idea that they are both monsters. Neutra's resurrection looks really cool, especially when he gets 6 arms. I love that. And yeah, there are just some great moments all round, and I do think the fight is iconic. You know, a lot of these fights are. Mayuri versus Xyloporo is iconic. Even Byakuya versus Zamari is a little bit, but yeah, I do think this is a great fight for Kenpachi and Neutra, just to have a massive bloodbath. There's no real development, but I do like it. And so we enter the top 3 entries on our best fights of the Hueco Mundo sub-arc list. And this one might cause some controversy, but I'm not entirely sure. And so coming in at 3rd place is the titanic final clash between Ichigo and Grimmjow. So expectations obviously were very high for this fight, the culmination of their rivalry that we've seen permeating the entire Arrancar arc so far. I mean, the top 2 entries of the last video were the Ichigo versus Grimmjow fights, so now everything comes full circle and their clash comes to an end. And yeah, it is suitably epic. It's a nice, brutal and even fight between 2 very evenly matched fighters, 2 monsters in fact, as Harabel kind of points out that it actually feels like 2 Espada duking it out. And I like this because this fight is a real allegory for Ichigo's continued descent into Hollowdom. In this fight, he openly is using his mask in front of Orihime. She's kind of terrified of him for the first time. It creates this really nice sense of conflict between Ichigo, who's fighting to protect and save his friends, but the person he's trying to save is suddenly afraid of him, as though he's one of the monsters who kidnapped her. Ichigo, of course, at this point is reminding her of her hollow captors, and I like that, but I also like that Orihime is able to shake that off eventually and cheer him on, egg him on, and basically tell him she doesn't want him to die, no matter what he's essentially had to become. I think it's really cool. You've got this idea of Ichigo has become this monster, especially if you think about earlier on in this list, you go back to the Dordoni fight where Ichigo didn't even want to pull out the hollow mask. Now he's got it on, he looks kind of evil in certain scenes. I think it's really well done. As for Grimmjow, I'll be completely honest, I've never really liked his Resurrection Pantera. I think it looks kind of weird. It's definitely not my favourite Espada release by any stretch of the imagination. That being said, Kubo uses it well to create some really fluid sense of movement. There's a cool one where Grimmjow kind of does like a spin kick. And like I said, the fight is good. The most important thing for me with this fight was that it showed both of their growth, particularly Ichigo. It's now a no-holds-barred, brutal, even fight, which I think is the most important thing. And there's definitely some feels to be had here as well. You get Grimmjow's flashback, you understand his point of view. He wants to become king, he hates people looking down on him, he hates Ichigo's eyes, always feel like he's looking down on him. And you kind of see Grimmjow in this almost pitiful light, which I think to be really interesting from where we first met him right back at the start. The fight does have its fair share of awesome moments as well. Grimmjow using the first ever Gran Rey Zero that we've seen, that's really cool. Ichigo kind of turning into a bit of a badass at one point in the fight and actually really starting to take things seriously with Grimmjow saying, like, you better not lose that resurrection, because clearly Ichigo is beginning to enjoy the fight, getting into the fight, again, feeding into this idea of tapping into the hollow, animalistic instinct inside of him, which is really cool. And Grimmjow being like, you know, you say you came here to save Orihime, but really you're here to fight me, and we're not going to leave until there's only one man standing. There's a really cool sense of fate with this fight, I think. It's like they were supposed to do this, regardless of whether or not Orihime was kidnapped. The reason then as to why it comes in at third on this list is, for me at least, the fight always kind of underwhelmed me in a weird kind of way. Don't get me wrong, like I said, I still think it's a great fight with awesome choreography, great character moments, but there is a creeping sensation of we've seen this before with this fight, in my opinion at least anyway. Maybe it's because it's the third clash between these two characters in not that long a space of time. I don't really know, but it doesn't feel like this fight ever reaches the kind of emotional stakes of, say, the final Ichigo versus Ulquiorra fight or anything like that. And maybe that is because this is more of a rival fight than anything else, and it is a fight between equals as opposed to those fights which kind of go into some really dark places. So, for me, I do like this fight. It does kind of, you know, feel a bit more, should we say, standard than some of the fights, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And Grimmjow's resurrection, like I said, I've always found to be kind of weird, but I do love moments where he brings out moves like Des Garon. I think that looks really cool visually. That's an awesome move, and it's really nice getting that insight into his history as well. So then, coming in at number 2 on the list, we have the first fight between Ichigo Kurosaki and Ulquiorra. And this is another one that's very similar to Ichigo versus Grimmjow round 1, in that it's a real reality check moment for both the heroes and for us as readers. So we've seen Ulquiorra a ton at this point, which in my opinion maybe makes it even more effective than Ichigo versus Grimmjow round 1, because Grimmjow kind of came out of nowhere to beat the crap out of Ichigo, and that is effective, but Ulquiorra's been built up all this time to be this really sinister presence behind the scenes a bit. and he finally gets to go toe-to-toe with Ichigo. And it's nice because Ichigo kind of comes out swinging, he has his hollow mask on, he hits him with a big Getsuga Tensho that Ulquiorra can't stop with both hands. That's really cool, but then the dust clears, and Ulquiorra's like almost completely fine, and he's just like, well, you know, if that's all you've got, then that's a pity. And he, you know, fires a massive Sero at Ichigo. All of this, by the way, totally iconic. Ichigo attacking Ulquiorra in the anime to Hollowed playing in the background. Really, really great stuff. Ulquiorra, like, shocked that Ichigo's got a hollow mask now. He's like, is he one of us? You know, he reacts, he feels like one of us. But it's good in how fast it goes south for Ichigo. That's what makes it so crazy. It's like Ichigo versus Grimmjow round 1 dialed up to 11, because Ichigo thinks, you know, he's kind of got a handle on the situation. He comes out of the Reiatsu with his hollow mask on, looking like a badass. I actually love the panel where he throws a Getsuga at Ulquiorra. I think it's like perfectly framed. I love the way you can see the ground, but then it like cuts off before it reaches the edge of the panel. Getting really nerdy, but it just looks great. But then Ulquiorra appears next to Ichigo, smacks him through the building. They end up outside and then into another building. And then obviously the famous moment where Ulquiorra punches Ichigo in the chest with his bare hand, and basically just leaves him to die. And you get the really, really nice twist where Ichigo thinks that Ulquiorra is Espada number 1. And this is cool because Kubo was doing something really clever here, where I think really Ichigo is talking for the reader at this point, because the way Kubo had been showcasing Ulquiorra was giving demands and orders to characters like Grimmjow and Yami. Very reasonable to think that he was going to be Espada number 1, just from the amount of story prominence he had had up till this moment. From a narrative perspective, it was just really cool, and I think it was expected that he would be the Primera, and then he's not. He's actually only the 4th Espada, and you know, if that doesn't put terror in the reader and the heroes, I don't know what does. This guy who's just absolutely wasted Ichigo, Hollow Mask Bankai Ichigo, and he's only the 4th Espada. And Ulquiorra even says, if you somehow manage to defeat me, there are 3 Espadas stronger than me. And it's like, okay, and Ulquiorra's like, there's no victory here for you. And that's just really powerful. It's really powerful. Ulquiorra just leaves him on the ground. Don't know why he doesn't just kill him. He thinks he's dead. Ichigo's Bankai does kind of leave him involuntarily, which is a sign that you are at death's door, but then he is saved through the actions of Grimmjow and Orihime. But I just think it's really, really good. Ulquiorra really showing why he's a force to be reckoned with. The fight obviously is not very long, but it's so memorable, and I think it's just really, really, it's a testament to how scary Kubo made Ulquiorra, this really statuesque villain who up until now hadn't really done anything, characterized by having his hands in his pockets, and then he just takes things seriously and pulls Ichigo apart, and it's really, really well done. With all of that being said, then it leaves us with one fight left, and the number 1 spot on this list for the Hueco Mundo Invasion sub-arc goes to Rukia Kuchiki versus the 9th Espada, Aronniero Ararueri. And this is a brilliant fight. It's a brilliant, brilliant fight. Probably Rukia's best fight in the entire series. And I say that as somebody who loves Asnot. But I think this is a much better fight than that one. This is raw, full of emotion. Kubo does really smart things with Aronniero to make him more than just fodder. Making him really memorable by just injecting him into Rukia's memories, essentially. So you all probably know this by now, it's not a big spoiler, but Aronniero takes off his mask and it's Cayenne Shiba from Rukia's past, her previous commanding officer who she had so much like adoration for, but more importantly, a gripping sense of guilt over his death. And it plays out like this sinister fever dream to begin with. Like, is this really Cayenne? Can we trust him? He's doing things that are really weird, but at the same time he only knows things that Cayenne should know. He is kind of acting like Cayenne. Rukia seems to think he's Cayenne, so maybe we should just believe her. And like, there's a moment where she jumps towards him and suddenly his blade is like in her face and she gets cut, and he turns to her and he's like, oh, you know, you've got to watch what you're doing, Kuchiki. And there's like 2 speech bubbles. It's just, the setup is so good for this fight, and it just carries on throughout as well, because over time Rukia slowly begins to suspect that maybe it's not actually Cayenne, and eventually he's like, oh, I do blame you for my death, but you can make it up to me just bring me the heads of all of your friends. And unfortunately for Arrancar, not the smartest guy in town, because I think that probably does give the game away quite hard, that he's not Cayenne, and Rukia obviously picks up on this, saying that Cayenne would never ask that of me. And we get this just brilliant fight where Rukia is so full of emotion, she's just so angry about it. But also, I think this is probably Rukia's greatest characterization in the series. Like, she says about how, I am willing to die for you, Cayenne. I know what I did to you and your family, and yes, I am happy to die if that's what it takes to make things right, but not before I save Orihime. And like that makes me really like Rukia as a character. And then, yeah, you just get this crazy fight with Cayenne, or Arrancar, however you want to look at it, where he's using Cayenne's abilities, Nejibana, all that sort of thing, and you get the really tragic truth about what's actually going on here. Rukia very cleverly uses a couple of Kido spells to bind Arrancar and then allow it. So basically the entire arena is covered in darkness, and she suspects that something might be up with that, so she shoots a hole in the wall, and they get this really cool moment where Cayenne's like screaming as the sunlight just melts his face, and it reveals the Arrancar, the actual Espada, who is this essentially like glass tube with two heads floating inside it. And he reveals that he ate the hollow Metastasia when he returned to Hueco Mundo, the same hollow that basically took over Cayenne's body. And because of that, he gained all of Cayenne's memories and everything like that through the power of his glottonoria. So it's really messed up, because what Rukia's actually fighting is, in a sense, Cayenne, and it's tough. It's really tough. But I think it's just done so well. And Rukia is like so close to death in this fight. Like, she gets bloodied and beaten and like massive cuts. Kuba does a great job in this fight of the attention to detail. Like, she keeps most of her injuries throughout the fight, which actually makes a huge amount of difference to the believability of the battle. I guess if there are a couple of downsides, Arrancaro's the first ever resurrection we see from an Espada, and it's really not that great. It just turns into a mass of tentacles and a weird mess of blobs. It doesn't do anything, really. I get it, it's supposed to be an accumulation of all 33,000 something hollows that Arrancaro's devoured over the years, but that doesn't mean it looks cool. And then Rukia's win is definitely pretty lucky. It's pretty convenient. She's hanging there in front of Arrancar with half a sword, and I think she just sort of like learns this third ability on the spot, this third dance, San no Mai Shirafune, which is essentially just an ability that lets her bring back her Zanpakuto if it's been damaged, which makes a ton of sense, as Zanpakuto is ice and cold based, but she regrows the sword through Arrancaro's face and it kills him. You know what, I don't hate it. I remember kind of hating it back in the day. I was like, that is just so lucky, that's so convenient. But I think the symbolism is there, the imagery makes it worth the while. There's great shots as well, the silhouetted shot of her stabbing him through the face. Yeah, it's just really nice. A nice end to it's a nice end to an incredible fight, I think. Rukia is on top form in this battle. Again, probably never used in a better way. The As-Not fight is not bad, but it doesn't feel as like well earned as this battle. This is a great fight, and it's ironic that essentially the weakest Espada has by far one of the best battles out of all the Espada, but there you have it. Alright guys, but that's it for this top 10 list of the best fights in the Hueco Mundo Invasion sub-arc. I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, if you haven't checked out part 1 yet, go and watch that video now on the Arrancar Invasion. Coming up next, we've got Fake Karakura Town arc, which will see us through to the end of the Arrancar arc, and I'm actually really looking forward to that one. I think it's probably going to be the hardest one to do for me anyway. But yeah, let me know in the comments below what you thought of my list. I'd love to hear yours as well. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't done already. Check out the Patreon if you want to help me out a little bit more. And until next time, guys, I'll catch you later. I'll see you then.